Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine.
First of all, greetings, everyone. My name is Thandi Gamedze. I'm a researcher at the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice at the University of the Western Cape. And it's really a privilege to moderate this important conversation tonight. On behalf of South African Christians for Palestine, I would like to warmly welcome you to this webinar called Gaza, a Line in the Sand, Zionism, Genocide, and Christian Witness. SAC4P is a network of Christians standing in solidarity with the oppressed, rooted in the teachings of Jesus, and it was formed in response to the ongoing genocide in Gaza and a recognition that as Christians we cannot be silent while injustice reigns, particularly as in this case when people are using our own faith tradition to justify that injustice. So to give you a brief idea of where we're going tonight, I'm going to provide a brief framing of the conversation, and then I'll introduce you to our brilliant speakers and hand over to each of them to give some input, and then we'll have a time of Q&A and discussion. Please make sure to mute yourselves and keep yourself muted during the conversation so that things don't get disrupted. But please do feel free to write questions in the chat that we can hopefully bring into the discussion later. So as you might have read in the event description, the World Council of Churches Central Committee, which is the main decision-making body of the WCC, met in Johannesburg in June. The deliberations on Palestine and the ongoing situation of apartheid, settler colonialism, occupation, and now genocide resulted in what I believe is their most progressive statement on Palestine to date. The statement names and condemns Israeli apartheid, mentions Israel's grave breaches of international law in Gaza as plausible genocide, and names Israel's continuing egregious actions in the West Bank in terms of the expansion of illegal settlements, the increasing settler violence, and the mass human rights violations. So in light of all this, the statement calls churches to take decisive action to hold Israel to account, including, and I quote, targeted sanctions, divestments, and arms embargoes. So while we celebrate this necessary step from the WCC and pray that it wakes up parts of the church that remain asleep, it's important also to recognize that this is by no means the first statement that has called for this kind of accountability. And perhaps of most significance for the church is the Kairos Palestine document. This was written in 2009 and outlined the crisis of Israeli occupation and showed clearly the ways in which this had dire implications for the lives and beings of Palestinians. The document showed the ways in which the theologies of the global church were upholding and legitimizing Israeli occupation and Palestinian oppression, and called for the church to be prophetic in challenging this injustice decisively. Importantly, part of the prophetic response called for from churches by the Kairos document was the implementation of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, to hold Israel accountable and advocate for justice for Palestinians. This call, of course, is no less relevant, unfortunately, as it was back in 2009, and if anything, given the genocide and mass starvation currently taking place in Gaza, it is more urgent than ever. So this is the context into which today's conversation is taking place and into which it will be speaking. Given the above, I'm so grateful for the incredible speakers that we have to contribute to this session, each of whom enters the conversation from a particular angle and has really important and timely insights for the church's response in these current times. So I'll briefly introduce each of them, and then I'll hand over to each of them for their comments, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion. So again, please feel free to send questions in the chat as they emerge. First up, we will hear from Advocate Dalia Kumsia. Dalia is a human rights lawyer specializing in legal human rights advocacy and the founder and director of the Balasan Initiative for Human Rights Palestine. She's a graduate of Birzeit University School of Law in Ramallah and she obtained her graduate degrees in international law and international administration from the Law School of the University of Paris. Prior to establishing the Balasan Initiative for Human Rights, Dalia worked in various Palestinian human rights organizations as a senior legal advocacy consultant. Second, we'll be hearing from Dr. Marthe Momberg. Marthe is a writer, an activist, and a scholar at the Bears Nordia Center for Public Theology of Stellenbosch University, and has advocated for Palestinian rights on local and global church forums, including the WCC, since 2011. Her book, 21 Voices: Why the Palestinian Struggle is a Global Matter, features the voices of South African and Israeli activists who support the Palestinian struggle. Finally, we will hear from Reverend Frank Chikane. Frank is an emeritus pastor of the Apostolic Faith Mission of South Africa, AFM, the chairperson of the South African chapter of the anti-apartheid movement against Israel's settler colonial and apartheid regime from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. He is also co-convener of the Africa and African Diaspora Conference and a visiting adjunct professor at the Wits School of Governance. He's a former moderator of the Church's Commission on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches, a former general secretary of the South African Council of Churches, and director general in the presidency and secretary of the cabinet. So as you can see, we have some really wonderful input in store for us tonight. So I'm going to first hand over to Dalia to speak about Palestinian Christians' challenges and demands in these times. Thank you so much, Dalia. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor, Dr. Tande. Good evening, everyone. Today, I am happy to join you, and I know I'm among my friends here in this webinar, many of whom I hold the deepest admiration and respect for. And that is precisely why I will make my intervention as frank as possible from the heart. Let me call it a loud wake-up call, if I can. And I will refrain from the technical legal language to describe the deterioration that we are witnessing. And I will not refer to any statistics. There are plenty of data and legal analysis to all the frameworks that currently apply in Palestine, and that we as human rights organizations publish on a regular basis, even if they remain inadequate in covering what really is going on currently. They're still available for everyone to see and stay updated. Rather, what I want to do here is to ring the alarm bells as loud as I can, as a Palestinian, as a human rights lawyer, as a Christian, and as a woman, and as a mother. Now, as a Palestinian, I continue to witness the fragmentation of my homeland and the oppression of my people that has deteriorated over the decades to reach unprecedented, atrocious scales. Multiple frameworks apply in my small homeland, Palestine, all at the same time. We have a prolonged, unlawful military occupation. We have a settler colonialism and an apartheid. All of these multi-layered systems of oppression happening together at the same time. Our daily reality is marked by annexation, systematic dispossession, excessive oppression, forcible displacement, ethnic cleansing, genocide, in absolute violation of humanity, of morality, and of course of legality. And I say legality as a lawyer, I understand perfectly the legal framings for these atrocious, systematic, and multi-layered oppression and systems of oppression that are imposed on us, and what practice constitutes what violation under what convention. But what I don't seem to understand is how is it that the entirety of the international legal system is allowed to collapse in this way without any accountability? How the very purpose of why we have the international legal system, why we developed it over the past decades, is being allowed to be completely devoided from its purpose. As a Christian, I sound the alarm that the community that I belong to, the earliest Christian in the world, is being literally eroded in my homeland, the land that brought Christianity to this world. We made a submission to several UN special rapporteurs and to the Committee of Inquiries, saying that Israel is eradicating the last remaining Palestinian Christian presence on both sides of the Green Line. This is a direct result of decades of intentional Israeli policies against Palestinian Christian communities, again, on both sides of the Green Line, of either direct forcible transfer and ethnic cleansing, like what happened during the Nakba, or of the deliberate creation of a coercive environment that, where the violations of fundamental rights is so systematic, and where it happens in a context of the absence of dignity, safety, and freedom that then drives the people to leave. And then we cannot say that they left really out of choice in this case. This, in addition to attacks against the churches or church-affiliated organizations, the dispossession of church property, discrimination against churches and church-affiliated organizations, preventing Christian celebration or hindering the work of the churches and the services they provide for their communities, like the multiple attempts to impose taxes on the church in defiance of the Jerusalem status quo, as well as physical assaults against the clergy or Christian celebrants, rising hate crimes against Christians. All of these have really brought the remaining Palestinian Christian presence in its ancestral homeland at the brink of extinction. Now, as a woman and as a mother, I look at all the chambers of my heart existing together and sometimes contradicting each other, fighting on a daily basis together. There's the one part of my heart holding heartbreak and immense sadness and in an incessant state of mourning, incessant sadness. For all the children are really ours, and we are all the bereaved mothers. There's also this part of my heart that's also holding this fiery rage that we live in a world that the most heinous crimes happen and are broadcasted in daylight. There's another part of my heart that holds a huge disappointment in the failure to stop what my homeland and people have been subjected to for decades. And then finally, there's this part of my heart that's clinging to hope and redefining it as an act of defiance. That's something that I really learned from my dear South African friends, some of whom are here in this webinar. And, using that hope to cling to the right of me and my son and their generation to grow up rooted in their homeland, in dignity, in safety, and in freedom, with their full fundamental human rights achieved and protected. And again, in our lifetime, as my South African friends told me multiple times. Now, I will use the second part of my intervention to make demands. And I say the word demands deliberately, for the current situation no longer permits us to merely make recommendations. I demand you to not pray for us if your prayer is not accompanied by action. I know I'm addressing Christian audiences in this webinar, and often the first thing that well-meaning Christians want to do is pray for us, and it comes from a really good place. But often prayers make the person praying feel better about a situation. And in a way, I feel that it alleviates their responsibility to act. And that's why, please, if you're praying, make sure you are also acting. Do not only pray. I demand you not to issue more statements if you're not going to make them actionable. Statements often coming a bit too late, recycled with diluted language, taking the current state of politics into consideration, and often conducted with intellectual debates in the safety of air-conditioned hall. mean absolutely nothing on the ground. During the course of my career, I myself drafted too many statements, read hundreds of statements, and responded to 100 others. As I did that, I also continued at the same time to watch the situation deteriorate on the ground. I hate to quote the Israeli Minister of Finance, Smotrich, but he is right to say that slogans do not matter. It is the action on the ground that does. He said that, I think yesterday or the day before, commenting on how they are burying the prospects of any future Palestinian state with actions and not with words. I hope our friends understand this as much as our oppressors do. Only then will we see a shift of the realities on the ground.
Out loud.
I demand you not to stand in solidarity, because solidarity is a verb. It is action. This action is meaningful, strategic, and measurable. I demand you to treat Palestine as you treat other causes of priority, because all our struggles are connected. When we talk about gender justice, environmental justice, in the churches, they do have programs with action plans and budgets. And this is what we should have too. I demand you to also leave the shy diplomacy and grasp and act upon the urgency of the moment with a drastic impacts and outcomes that go beyond Palestine and threaten the entire region and the world. I demand you to grasp the gravity of a Palestine, the land that brought Jesus to this world, without its Christians, to understand that this is precisely what is at stake at this point. I demand you to clean our faith from the toxic theology of Christian Zionism. But also, more importantly, I demand you to remove Zionism from our Christianity and from our churches. Who is this God in our face that asks us to be silent, or to use diluted language to face oppression, or to say governments should, deflecting the responsibility to governments? No, we should, we all should. Let us all do our part and act and do it fully. I demand you to understand that avoiding action that is concrete, that is strategic, that is geared towards sanctions and accountability, that is measurable with allocated budgets, programs, and plans will continue to produce worse patterns of violations and oppression. I demand you to understand that there is no other way around it, and no other way but doing it and taking that road. I demand you to take the lead and continue taking the lead in taking action, to continue setting an example and showing the world how oppression is fought. For one day, our friends will be asking themselves, what did we do to stop this? And the answer cannot be, we issued statements, we called on the governments, and we prayed. As a Palestinian, I cannot but quote Nelson Mandela when he said, our freedom is not complete without the freedom of Palestinians. I demand that you complete your freedom. His words remain as true today as they were then. The struggle for justice, for dignity, for equality, for accountability is not only a Palestinian struggle. It is a basic human one. And until Palestine is free, humanity itself is not whole. Thank you. Amandla.
Awetu. Thank you so much, Dalia, for those powerful words, and thank you for sharing your rage and heartbreak and disappointment and hope as someone who is truly on the front lines where all of these realities are coming to a head, and the work that you're doing advocating for people on the ground doesn't go unnoticed, and we're grateful for the clarity of your demands in this session. Thank you. Next up, I want to bring in Marthe Momberg, who will be speaking to us about the WCC Central Committee resolutions and their implications for the church in South Africa and globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Thandi. Thank you, Dahlia. I almost feel embarrassed to talk now because I've got to talk about a statement and about the process behind it, because, but it's not a new realization. I mean, when I prepared, when I try to do what I do, time is passing. And each minute, someone is dying or killed or hungry or suffering. And this has been going on for almost 80 years. The Nakba of 1948 has been an ongoing Nakba. And the world failed the Palestinians, Christians, churches. We failed the Palestinians. We failed ourselves, in fact. In 2017 already, the church leaders of Palestine wrote to the World Council of Churches saying that things are beyond catastrophic and that they can no longer tolerate the shallow diplomacy that Dahlia also referred to. Well, that same year, the World Communion of Reformed Churches wrote and issued and accepted anonymously a very powerful statement, but it was a statement. It never translated into action. Yes, followed on the statement, extensive education material was developed, but churches were urged to Protestant churches were urged to educate their members on this issue. And I don't think that this has happened on any broad scale. So some of us in Kairos for Global Justice, the Theology Committee, worked behind the scenes at the time. And then what sits behind the solution, where it actually started, this resolution, this statement that was issued in June this year by the WCC is 3 years already, 3 years. The Global Kairos for Justice Theology Committee deliberated on how they can put the issue of Palestine and apartheid, because that was the term at the time, on the agenda of the World Council of Churches. Previously, the term occupation was the term under discussion, but at the time, the word apartheid, as apartheid is defined in international law, was the issue. And at the time, the Anglicans of South Africa took the lead. The Presbyterian Church of the United States also played a leading role, because a committee can't, like Global Kairos for Theology, can't put something onto the table of the WCC. It must be a member church. What I want to stress is that the South Africans were willing, the Anglican Church, to play a leading role, and they did, but it was not accepted by the WCC at the time. A Palestinian woman who was on the agenda was written out of the agenda, and this issue was, the Anglican Church put forward a draft resolution to the Public Witness Committee of the World Council of Churches. Normally, when such a thing happens, the rule says that there must be 10 supporting churches. We had 15 supporting churches in the world, and yet the Anglicans were not allowed to table this at the WCC. Instead, the WCC proposed their own draft resolution, and that was then debated. And because of fierce resistance, especially from the EKD, the German church, it was not accepted. But what was accepted was that the reports of B'Tselem, an Israeli-based human rights organization, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch on what apartheid practiced by Israel constitutes has to be studied, and then recommendations must be made to the General Secretary. So I was part of that team then last year, 2 years later in 2024. We were 20 people from all over the world, countries like Sweden, Canada, Colombia, Brazil, Indonesia, Sweden, Germany, United States, Palestine, and Lebanon, who have been at this meeting, and 3 long days. And then we made recommendations to the General Secretary, and that was the input that then served this year in June when the statement was accepted, not as we phrased it. The thing is, at the time last year, obviously the issue was no longer just apartheid. And I hate to say just apartheid, because apartheid as it is worse, bad enough. The issue then was also genocide. So yes, we have a statement, and yes, years have passed each day on which someone is killed or maimed or disadvantaged. But what we do have is indeed the most powerful statement that the WCC have issued. And it not only names apartheid, it owns it. And that is new. And as much as we hate that things are so slow, this is a significant point in time. So the WCC says that they recognize and denounce the system of apartheid imposed by Israel on the Palestinian people. And I want to say that it's not just apartheid in Palestine, in other words, in Gaza and in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel also practices apartheid in terms of those Palestinians who live in Israel, the so-called Arab Israelis. And in terms of the Palestinians who are not allowed to return to their houses, because that's also a system of discrimination. Oh, my battery is low of my computer. I hope it lasts. And it asks us to implement sanctions and accountability in terms of international law. So the statement of the WCC starts with highlighting the impunity of Israel, but Israel flagrantly violate international humanitarian and human rights laws. So that those are the laws that rule human rights in war times and conflict times, and also in peace times, as well as the basic principles of morality. And the second paragraph of the statement is about taking sides. So here the WCC says that it recognizes a clear distinction between the Jewish people, our siblings in faith, and the acts of the government of Israel. So what that means is that this is not about labeling or stigmatizing individuals, but about denouncing a system of apartheid, a system of oppression and of genocide. And the WCC then stands firm against any racism, it says, including anti-Semitism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. That's a very important point, because by doing that, the WCC is connecting the dots between similar dynamics in different struggles. And it says it doesn't matter whether the discrimination is against Jews or Palestinians or against Muslims or against people who are deemed to be of a different color, whatever that color may be. The discrimination is unacceptable. And also the WCC does not focus only on Gaza, but it also mentions the atrocities in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, because although that's as televised and as known as what happens in Gaza, it is as bad, and it has been going on for as long as people have been discriminated at in Gaza. The third paragraph in the WCC statement highlights the importance of international law. So the WCC is very committed to upholding international human rights laws. And it mentions relevant laws such as the Fourth Geneva Convention, the Rome Statute of the International Court of Justice, of the International Criminal Court, that, for instance, defines what apartheid is in international law, the United Nations Charter, and various UN resolutions. And then it says within this framework of law, but also its commitment to interreligious dialogue and cooperation, it highlights four things: naming, recognizing, denouncing the system of apartheid that violates not only international law, but moral conscience, a call on states, churches, international institutions to implement nonviolent resistance in the form of BDS, and so the need to give support to the International Criminal Court and other international bodies. It affirms, and here again is something that I noticed as new in what the WCC says. It doesn't only affirm the inalienable human rights of Palestinians to freedom, justice, and self-determination. The word return is included, which means that the almost 7 million Palestinians who live in the diaspora, those are the descendants of the nearly 1 million people who became refugees in 1948, that they, as allowed for under international law, have the right and must be allowed to return to Palestine. So that is a crucial new thing. And then finally, the WCC asks for the resilience and witness of Palestinian Christian churches and communities, upholding their right to remain on their land and to freely practice their faith, which we know is not the case, as we've seen in recent weeks in the demolishing of Taibe. So what does this mean? On the negative side, if we, and I think back to the Cry for Hope document that was issued in 2020, we cannot serve God and the oppression of the Palestinians. The integrity of the Christian faith is at stake. Our own faith is at stake. Who we are, how we define our own Christianity is at stake. The soul of Christianity is at stake. For us as South Africans, this issue is extremely personal. Not only are so many eyes, all eyes, in fact, on South Africa, on what we as Christians do, but we are not strong enough. We haven't been strong enough. We haven't been loud and clear enough. In our own churches, and I think that several of you who participate in this seminar will know, that our church leaders don't want to take sides. They think that they need to take sides between Israelis and Israel and Palestine. And they don't understand that their job is to side with justice and truth and moral principles, and not with flags. So, and then they take sides with those whom they don't want to alienate, and they ignore the rest of us who are still a minority, who say that who advocate for Palestinian rights, we cannot blame anyone but ourselves. We have to find ways around it. We have to persist. We have to do the hard work. We have to struggle. It is a struggle. We have to struggle. If we don't do it, who is going to do it? If we, with our history of apartheid, and that is the quote that Dalia mentioned of former President Mandela, our freedom is not complete without the freedom of the Palestinians. We cannot regain integrity, moral integrity in this country and as human beings and as Christians if we don't actively and publicly, openly voice ourselves and act. So the World Communion of Reformed Churches General Assembly is coming up in October. What are we doing? How do we respond as South Africans to this statement? Are we going to issue another statement? What do we do in our congregations? It starts at home. It starts with us going to our ministers, talking to them and saying we have to educate ourselves. There is material available. We can talk about that. There's a lot of material available. We have to interrogate our language, our ideas, our theologies, our practices, what we say from the pulpit, what we sing. And then we have to reach out to Palestinians. We cannot only try to rescue ourselves. We have to do both. We have to rescue ourselves, critique ourselves, and we have to connect with Palestinians, Palestinian churches, and we have to influence our newspapers, our media, and our politicians. There are various ways of doing it. I'm running out of time. This issue is the most urgent moral issue of our time. And it's not one of many issues. There are many issues. But this one is intimately connected to our identity as Christians, our integrity as human beings, and our identity as South Africans. We have to act. We have to be creative. We have to have immense inner strength to do this, and we need one another. Thank you for the opportunity to share this platform.
Thank you so much for that, Marthe. I think you highlighting this process through which the statement was created makes very visible the different powers that we are up against in this work. And I think you drawing out the different aspects of the actual statement perhaps highlight some of the things that we can strategically leverage in the action that we are needing to take forward as the church. As I listen to you, I think about the Kairos document of 1985, the South African Kairos document that talked about churches being neutral and apolitical and refusing to take a side, and this call to prophetic theology back then in our situation of apartheid, to name the powers that be, to name the powers that are perpetuating injustice. So thank you for highlighting some of those things, Marthe. Now going to hand over to Reverend Frank Chikane, who will speak about Gaza as the worst form of human depravity and highlight some of the theological and spiritual challenges. Over to you, Frank.
Yeah, what can one say, after listening to Dahlia and the demands that she makes, it could tempt you to change the script and do what you had not planned to do. But I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I just want to say to our sister Dahlia, you can be sure that at least those South Africans who understand and are committed, we are with you, and we are with the people of Palestine. It's very painful to even watch the news about this experience. I would like to start from where Marthe left, about the WCC statement, and then go to what I had planned to deal with. I just want to say I was also involved in this. It was a huge battle, and we worked together with Palestinian Christians to deal with this matter, to get the World Council of Churches to cross the line. And didn't just want them to draw the line in the sand, but we wanted them to cross the line, because when you draw it, it's when you stop something, and it has a different meaning. But we wanted them to cross a line from balancing evil with justice and trying to treat the pain of the Palestinian as something to be equated with the Zionist Jewish Israelis. And I say Jewish Israelis, recognizing that there are 10% of Jewish Israelis who support the Palestinians, and the Jewish communities around the world, which are saying, not in my name. We had to get the WCC across the line, and it crossed it. The statement may not mean much to people who are not involved in that struggle, but they crossed the line. And having crossed the line, the question is what action, as Dahlia is saying, and I will come to that part of it. But I just want to say, having crossed the line, this has attracted powerful demonic forces and powerful forces of Zionism that are taking on the WCC as we speak. And I just want to say to this community that's part of this webinar, we have the first task we need to deal with is to actually defend the WCC against these forces. And what has happened recently is that the EKDF from Germany, the German leadership, a church in the leadership in the church, sent the delegation to the WCC to go and tell them, the general secretary and the moderator, that they do not agree with the WCC on this matter. And I just want to say I've shared my view with the church leadership in this country. They may not have reached, the message may not have reached all of them, because they need to sit in a church leaders meeting to deal with this matter. To say to them, it is time for the churches in South Africa to send a delegation to Germany to go and interact with our siblings in the Lord, to say to them they cannot do what they are doing. They can't say that you can't use the word apartheid. I said, if you want to know about apartheid, ask South Africans, and it is South Africans who should go to Germany and say to them, your position cannot be in terms of our understanding of the scriptures and understanding of our faith. The second thing for us to do is to work with the Palestinian brothers and sisters, and they are working on it, especially those who were in the committee, were in Marthe. I'm sure you've seen the letters to say now it's time for the WCC to take action, go beyond the statement, as Dania is saying, and take action. And this action is the one we called for in 2023 when the genocide started. Why can't we get all the leaders of the WCC together with the Catholic Church? Because the Pope, former Pope, had already crossed that line and called this thing genocide. And we can act together and go to Palestine and go and demand that we want to cross the border and be with the people in Gaza. And if we have to die, we must die with them. Because we have a responsibility to not solidarity in terms of talking about it, but getting to be with the Palestinians in solidarity. The third is that we need to get these churches internationally to take on their countries, especially in the Christian West, because our challenge is in the Christian West. It's not just Europe, it's Christian Europe that is the problem. And therefore, Christians have got a greater responsibility to deal with what is happening in Palestine than we realize. To come to the theme I had committed myself to deal with, I just want to say, and that will explain why we need an extraordinary action, because we're not going to get it from people whose humanity has been so altered that you can expect much from them. I want to say that Gaza has revealed the depth of human depravity that has not been seen during our lifetime. I say my lifetime because it has happened in the past. And that you have to be racist and colonial to operate at such a low level of moral conscience that reduces you to the worst form of behavior of the animal kingdom. And I chose the animal kingdom, not to say animals, but the animal kingdom, because we belong to it. And we are almost operating at a level that's the lowest. In theological terms, this is the level where Christian Zionism finds itself, with a tribal God that is not the God of all of humanity. And it is a tribal God that's not the God of all of created humanity. But it's a God that can be the God that Jesus Christ is part of. Because Jesus died for everybody. God loved the world, all of it. God did not create us all in his image. And I'll use this English sexist language that doesn't apply in my own language. In his image, and if we are made in the image of God, God can discriminate against his own image. And I just want to say, this human depravity is not the traditional concept that actually expresses itself in the form of the original sin and the Garden of Eden. But in the place of the concept of the original sin, I would like to apply it in another place. And where the original sin is the transatlantic trade and the colonial enterprise, because that's the one that gave birth to this concept and concretized the concept of racism. And once you do that, then you think when you arrive in the Americas, you've discovered land without people. And when they talked about Palestine, these Christian Zionists talked about land without people for people without land. These are Christian Zionists. It's not Zionists in particular. They borrowed from our language in terms of Christian Zionism. And in this world, which Dahlia is talking about, you can detain, you can imprison, you can torture, you can displace, you can exile, you can banish, which is what we went through. You can kill, you can exterminate, or deprive of any human rights, or starve, like they are starving the Palestinians in Gaza. You can take their land, and they will say Zionists, Jews can claim their land of centuries ago, and I'm talking about Christian Zionism, but the indigenous people can't claim their land in the Americas and in Palestine. I often think about when they say land of the Jews of centuries ago. I say, but then we must remove the Americans from that continent, because it's the land of the indigenous people. And once you say that, it would not make sense to them. And so the racist way of thinking is what has allowed this type of sin to happen in Gaza. The second one is that when they did not only do that and killed us, colonized us, but they also took our resources, empowered themselves, produced weapons of mass destruction, and now they repress everybody. We have no right to our sovereignty as we stand as South Africans and listening to Trump trumping our rights and our sovereignty and many other people. You don't have a right, they've got the power to kill. And the third sin is the genocide, because exactly this way of thinking leads to genocide. The WCC has studied many genocides that happened on the African continent, which people have forgotten about. And I just want to say now in Gaza, we are seeing the worst of this aberration. And for Christian Europe and USA, it is not just an aberration that's happening in Gaza and West Bank. It is the norm. They've been doing that from taking slaves, colonial enterprise, and dealing with us, robbing us of our rights. They no longer have sensitive perceptions to judge what is wrong and what is right, because what is wrong is when their system is challenged, and what is right is when they
I think we might have just lost Rev Chikane. Let's just wait and see if he comes back. Okay. Frank, are you with us? I think he might have gotten kicked out of the meeting. But thank you, Rev Frank, also for, I think, highlighting that the forces that we're up against are strong and need to be taken seriously in how we combat them. as well as thank you for connecting the struggles in our histories and situating this within that history and within histories of ideas and theologies that kill. And I think we're very grateful. Frank, are you back with us?
Well, I'm back, yes, and I can see you have summarized. But let me say the last thing because it's very
Please,
short. I was
please.
going to say we need to understand that the Christian West. I want to be specific because when you look at the map of the world of people who recognize Palestine, it's the global South and the eastern part of Europe and Asia is part of it. It's the Christian world that is a problem. And so my call is that we must take a stand, engage this Christian West in the way we did it during the apartheid days, to make sure that the people with conscience around the world, including in the Christian West, take on these governments that support this genocide and killing of Palestinians. And that's why we have formed the South African chapter of the anti-apartheid movement. I've been traveling around as chair, and we are now in the process of bringing all the movements in the world that are working towards a global struggle against these forces that are committing this genocide. And we did that with South Africa. We had a worldwide anti-apartheid movement. We want to reach that stage, which forced the United States to adopt an act, the Anti-Apartheid Act, vetoed by the president and then vetoed by the Congress. And it stood. And this is where the hope is. I think God acts. If we fail, the stones will speak. And this is where God is, and that's what we need to do. And in the next few months, although many people will be dead already, but we are already at a stage where we can master that movement. Jewish Israel is making a big mistake. I won't go and quote what I wanted to quote about it of this former general of intelligence, military intelligence. They're making a mistake. They think power will sustain them in that region by killing people who differ with them. The Lord is going to intervene. One of these days, that power will come to an end. No empire remains in place forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Moruti, and thank you for your prophetic witness, and really a lifetime of putting your money and your body where your mouth is. So thank you for your leadership in this as well. We're going to open up to some of the questions that have come in the chat, and I'm going to just read some out that I've kind of grouped that are somewhat similar or along similar themes, and then we would appreciate input from the speakers. So I'll read out a few, and then we can have some input, and then I'll read out the next group and again. So firstly, from Nigel, what actions should we be taking? What actions will be helpful at this time? Similarly, from Angus, what can we do now to make a meaningful change? For Rosa, specifically around the WCC statement, how can this be localized and taken to every church in the country and the continent? Nigel, again, specifically around the statement, how do we move from the statement to dismantling the theology of Zionism, dispensationalism, and other harmful theologies that are preached in churches that are keeping Christians complicit in large numbers? How do we move the church out of its slumber? How do we call the church to repentance? And again, I think similarly related to action in the church, How can we build bridges into spaces and fraternals of ministers and places that train, teach, and commission pastors and serve Christian communities? So some similar questions around action, particularly related to the church, some different variations of that. Is there someone that would like to jump in? Dalia, do you have some input?
Yes, thank you, Tandy. Indeed, since I spent quite a chunk of my intervention stressing the importance of action. Now, if we talk about international law and what it says, there is a legal obligation on states to act towards action. So action is not really selective. It's really a legal obligation when there are grave violations against of international law and war crimes and crimes against humanity in the sense that we have in Palestine. And international law offers a big menu of what states can and should be doing in this case. It starts with targeted sanctions, with embargoes, with the downgrading of diplomatic relations, the downgrading or even stopping the free trade agreements and what have you. But what I would like to encourage, because here I am not addressing governments to remind them of their legal obligation, I'm addressing Christians in their churches and congregations. You need to make your action very strategic. Now, what are we asking at this point? Our short-term priority is stopping the atrocious oppression and the genocide, mainly in Gaza, and the heavy militarization of the West Bank, which is equally atrocious. So how can this action stop that? I think from what we see, even landmark statements, as important as they are, landmark decisions from the International Court of Justice, or from the International Criminal Court, like the arrest warrants, even things that are that important, they remain what they are, statements or an advisory opinion. The only thing that will shift the reality on the ground is action that forces Israel to stop. Sanctions, basically. Sanctions. The immediate short-term priority is stopping all these atrocious crimes now. And then we can talk about, a process of accountability and justice and hopefully one day peace building. But at this point now, we need to stop it. The only thing that will stop it is sanctions. Targeted sanctions. That's why I say strategic action. We have limited time and limited resources. We need to think, how are the actions that we will take going to stop Israel? How influential are they? Symbolic measures are, completely incapable of changing. Actually, at some points, they can be counterproductive. I would say that if they're not accompanied with meaningful action. For example, when some European states decided to recognize the state of Palestine last summer, the Israeli response came as a punishment to Palestinians to establish 5 new settlements. One of them is in a vital last remaining green area in Bethlehem, the last remaining green area, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we need to be really careful in assessing the action that we take in that scale, in that sense.
Thank you so much, Dalia. Sanctions, embargoes, actions that will force Israel to stop. And I think many of us on this call are South Africans, and some action that is currently taking place is trying to stop our government from sending coal to Israel. Our country still sends a significant amount of coal to Israel. So get involved in those actions to force our own government to stop being complicit in the genocide and occupation. Thank you. Marthe and Frank, do you have anything to add? Marthe, maybe you want to come in on the resolutions and how those can be localized to churches?
Yes, I think in addition to what Dalia is saying, we have to highlight what churches and Christians and we as individuals specifically can do, because sanctions needs to be implemented by implemented by governments. In South Africa, unlike churches, for instance, either in the United States, cannot invest because churches don't have investments as such, financial investments in Israel. But what is rife in South Africa are these pilgrimages to the so-called Holy Land. And places like Bethlehem and Jerusalem are sold as Israeli cities and towns. And we have to, as Christians and churches, say, but this is basically a lie to South Africans. Those places to start with are not in Israel. And when you go there, what about the living stones? What about the Palestinians? What about the Palestinian Christians? And do you interrogate what is actually going on there? So we have to critique and call out the tourism industry in this country that take people on so-called religious pilgrimages to Israel and Palestine. And then we need to, it's really us as individuals, not the South African Council of Churches, not the Synod, because I know it's terrible, but like politicians, also the Synod, people in leadership positions are often elected. And we have to put pressure from the bottom up, speak from the bottom up, to influence the atmosphere, highlight the moral issues, so that whoever is elected, we have to also hold our politicians accountable. Whoever is elected, know that we will not vote for them if they don't put this issue central in the government and in church politics as well, because there's lots of politics in churches. We need to start with the basic issues. I listed or I mentioned the link to the material that I mentioned that is available for free. It's called Focus Palestine, and I added a link on the question and answer section. We have to distinguish between the Israel of the Bible and the people, the modern state. We have to start with those basic terms, but we have to go to our individual ministers, start talking to them, ask them if we can have a meeting, ask them, can we invite someone to speak? They will say no. Many of them will say no. Some of you have had that experience. Then we ask again, and we ask again, and we give them material to read. We continue and continue. We do not stop. That's what we need to do. I know it sounds like too little, too late, but we cannot skip this work. So I want to say, in addition to the strategic actions, and in addition to the sanctions, the boycotts, and the divestment, which we all have to participate in it, all of us can choose what we buy from where. At least we can do boycotts. We've got to act in individual capacities, but we also have to organize ourselves. And there again, the strategic issues come in. So we have to, when there's a global body or a national meeting, we have to get ourselves onto the agenda and ask for a turn to speak. And if we can't do it ourselves, we have to ask people who are like Father Chikane and others who are knowledgeable on the matter to come and speak. The strategy I have in mind is that we need to start to dominate the media, social media. Most people, there's a lot of research have been done on this. Most people do not change because they change their values. They don't. Actually, they think they have good values. All of us think that. They don't change because of reason. They don't change because of faith. They change because they get ashamed. Because most people are there and they are here. I'm not saying that we need to shame people, but I'm starting to say that we should make our narrative the dominant narrative. each of us can write a letter to a newsletter. Each of us can go to our congregations and speak up.
Thank you so much. Frank, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add?
yeah. Can I just say, the one thing we shouldn't do is to actually spend our energies fighting against each other rather than fight for Palestine. I think it's very critical and we need to be strategic. So we have agreed as a South African chapter, which brings all these solidarity groups, that we apply sanctions. So that's not a debate anymore. It's how we do it. And we have got thematic groups, about 11 of them on each one of these areas, like economic boycotts, like stop coal. And BDS, it's much more strong and it has gone to the
Oh no, I think we've lost him again. If he comes back, then we'll let him finish what he was saying. But for now, let me just pose the remainder of the questions. We only have about 10 minutes left, so we won't be able to answer them all. So maybe as I'm reading them, you can think about which ones you would like to speak to, and it's fine if we don't cover everything. But Stephen in the chat said, I would be interested to know what's happening in the German church today, as the confessing church there in the 30s and 40s was important as a witness to the world that now all Germans were Nazis and aligned with the genocide there. Mike said, Mandela played an important role in allaying the fears of white South Africans during the anti-apartheid struggle. Should Christians in South Africa be making an effort to allay fears of Jews in our communities and push the idea of one secular state of Israel-Palestine, where all are guaranteed human rights and equality? Lauren said, what budget has the WCC dedicated to work with its 356 member churches to enact the statement? Donnelly said, there are still very few Christians visible at protests. Why is this? Msizik said, Rev Chikane, can you help explain the hypocritical behavior of the SA government on this? The ICJ versus the trade and diplomatic relations that remain intact with the genocidal country it accuses. Rubina said, would SACC, South African Council of Churches, be able to influence the Department of Trade and Industry to discourage trade with the Zionist state? And Ayanda asked, how do I get updates about such meetings? So
I'm back again.
You're back again. Okay, you're
But
back
I've heard
again.
you.
Okay, so I just highlighted the remainder of the questions, and we just have about 10 minutes left. So maybe each of you can just take a few minutes to share your last thoughts, respond to any of the questions that you would like to, and then we'll close off. Rev Frank, do you want to start and close?
Let me start by saying thank you for this webinar. I think it's very helpful. We must work on strategies now to achieve our objectives. We don't differ about where we should go. I was just concluding that using the coal, BDS and some of our colleagues are here who have done hard work. We have talked to the trade unions. They say they can divert this coal from Israel to other markets, and they are ready to actually make sure they don't load it. And so we need to be more targeted now rather than general, because general statements don't necessarily cost the change. I think we close. I took the trouble to talk to the International Committee of the ANC to say the policy of those who lead the government comes from here. What's your position? And they say, we agree, we are part of the South African chapter, we must act against this. So that's what we need to do now, target with the thematic groups and different entities to make this change. The question about what the hypocrisy. Now, I've been in government myself. I know what happens in government. Is that it was a hard push to get that case in The Hague. It didn't happen just overnight without consequences. We're going to have to go to the sanctions. There are going to be consequences for it, and we don't have time to talk about it. So let's not take it that it is just unplugging something and nothing happens. There are consequences, and you need to be able to deal with those consequences. And so let's work together. We have got a program of action. Let's work together to make sure the sanctions are applied. I agree with Dalia. Once you apply sanctions, stop loading. We stop the ship coming around with arms and stop it and not reach the destination. Let's get on with the work. I just want to make sure that we don't spend more energy fighting each other, rather than spend more energy getting everybody across the line.
Thank you so much. Amen to that. Marthe, do you have anything to add? And then we can end with Dalia, if that's okay. Are you figuring out how to unmute?
There we go. Sorry.
No.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I fully support that. And I think that once we have decided on an action, we should join forces. At the same time, I do think that each of us, this is not the time to delegate. It's all hands on deck right now. This issue is so urgent and so horrific that we have to join forces, be strategic, but wherever we go, we need to speak up and make our voice mainstream without dominating, without perpetuating the dynamics of oppression, but do it with dignity, with love, with kindness, with wisdom, with leadership, because that is the kind of world that we want to live in. We have to live. This is also a challenge for me every day to myself, to try and live that dignity and integrity that I want to see in this world. So yeah, you can hear me. I hinge between the deeply personal and the global strategic, these actions, and I think both are important.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. And over to you, Dalia, for some last comments.
Thank you, Tande. Honestly, it's been heartwarming to share this panel with such amazing speakers. Again, it's I hold the utmost respect for all of you and admiration. But I really hope that I could convey one thing during this briefing is the urgency for immediate action. You'll pardon me if I came across as harsh when I said, do not pray for us, do not issue more statements, do not stand in solidarity, act. But I am in direct touch with the reality on the ground. I go to the field and I document and I tell you one thing and I promise you one thing. What you see on the news is barely scratching surface to what's going on here on the ground. What is unreported is a lot more horrifying and a lot more in terms of numbers and severity and scale than what you actually see. You know, in times of genocide, we in the West Bank feel ashamed to talk about the forced displacement of communities, the war crimes that are ongoing here. We prioritize. We are in a position where we are prioritizing, you know, the violations. When a genocide is ongoing, we feel ashamed to speak about anything less than that. But if Israel is not made to stop with concrete action, it will not happen. We will see things deteriorate way further, even if it's hard to imagine now. It's hard to imagine how things can go worse, but they will, and I promise you that. And it happens all the time. So before we take an action, we have to ask ourselves, what is the program for it? What are the plans for it? Who is going to be implementing it? And what budgets are there for this kind of action? Whatever it takes. Be it direct advocacy and lobbying with your government, be it, internally within the churches. I cannot dictate what you should be doing. You know best what you should be doing. And I feel when we walk with our South African friends and partners, we are, in good hands. You've walked this path before, and, we are honored that you're joining us as we walk it here in Palestine. So with that, I conclude, and I hope I could convey the urgency and the need for strategic action.
Thank you so much, Dalia, and thank you in particular for being here and sharing your thoughts in these very dark times. We are very grateful for your wisdom and your challenges and your words. We are going to close this session now. I just want to say thank you to some of the different people that have been involved, but I think let this be encouragement and a challenge to all of us in all of the spaces that we have influence in. This is not the first time that the church has been complicit in injustice, and this is not the first time that the church has played a prophetic role. The WCC under apartheid had an initiative called the Program to Combat Racism, where they actually channeled money to the movements that were resisting apartheid in South Africa. So let's draw on those prophetic histories in our context and challenge the church to be that prophetic voice again, wherever and however we can. Thank you so much to South African Christians for Palestine for organizing and hosting this event. We're very grateful. Thank you so much to all the participants who have joined, and thank you for your questions in the chat. And we hope that you have found it encouraging and engaging and useful to go and take different things back to your spaces. And a huge thank you to the speakers for your generosity in your input and your challenges to us all today. We're very grateful. Have a good evening further.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
You gotta make a choice, better be on the right side of history.